to married entrepreneurs build a successful business and a successful marriage? Our guests today are Robert and Kaylee Fukui. They are the founders of I-61 Inc., which is a business consulting company. And they specifically work with married entrepreneurs in creating better work-life balance by structuring their business to scale and giving back precious time so that they can invest in their marriage and their life and all the things that are important to them. So I'm really excited to have them here. They are co-authors of the new book, Tandem, which I have read, and it is excellent. The Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Greater Work-Life Balance, and highly recommend it. It's very relatable. It's very practical, fantastic resource. And so, Robert and Kaylee, we're excited to have you here. Welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Thank you for having us, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And it's so great to see we have so many people in common. So
this will make it easy. When you reached
so close.
Yeah. When you know what, it's funny because you reached out and I'm like, wait a second, I know this guy, right? Like I've seen him in pictures.
Uh-oh, you're in trouble now.
Hopefully not in the post office.
I mean, like I've seen you on Facebook in pictures with Tim Porter. And so that was I was like, wow, that's so cool. So it's cool that we're both on the same kind of journey where God is just leading us. And I love how he's making those divine appointments. I see this as a divine appointment. So cool. Well, let's talk about this work-life balance that you reference. As a married entrepreneur, is it even possible to create work-life balance? What does that even mean? Work-life balance. Maybe let's start there.
That's where you got to start, because you got to be able to define it. Otherwise, you won't be able to achieve it, work toward achieving it. So I think the misnomer around work-life balance is about quantity of time, spending X amount of hours in business versus marriage versus volunteer work. It's not a quantitative measurement. It's a qualitative measurement. It's about quality of time. So you can be with your spouse for 4 hours running errands, but that's not quality time. But 5 minutes looking her in the eye and telling her how special she is and she means the world for me and what can I do today to make your day special is worth more than those 4 hours, right?
Yes.
And so quality of time is that much more important. So when we define work-life balance, it's helping the couples and even helping us when we started this for ourselves is defining what does that look like, and then break it down into the most think about the most stressful time you can have in your life and your business. And in the midst of that, during that week, how do you make sure Kaylee and I stay connected? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take, I just shared, 5 minutes a day. We spend, 15 to 20 minutes a day in prayer first thing in the morning, right? That's our first place of connection. And so regardless of what happens the rest of the day, we're good. I mean, we want more, but even if, we're in a busy stretch, just that 15 minutes a day to pray and bring number one, God in the center of our marriage, connecting emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and of course, physically, and then just blessing each other, like that carries you, right?
Yeah. And I just still want to say to the men out there, there's nothing like having your husband pray for you. It's just so uplifting. And sometimes it can carry you through the whole week because, we have a lot going on. Yeah. And it's just nice to have that blessing.
Yeah, I was going to say, Robert, as you were sharing that about the 5 minutes looking in her eyes and just connecting and praying together, I was thinking you just won all the women. They're all like, who is this guy? Can I introduce him to my husband?
Yeah. We said earlier, I mean, I'm sure we can say this as adults, but, guys, you want more sex, connect with your wife. Like you don't have to ask for it or demand it. I mean, if you literally just connect her with your wife, it's just a natural next step. I mean, it's not like right at the moment, but it's a lot of times as we get further and further in our years of marriage and we get further and further disconnected because we're not doing those simple things. That's where the intimacy starts to erode. Because it's not because we don't find each other sexual, but we kind of do in a sense because we're not feeling connected. Right. And that's what guys have a hard time figuring that out.
Well, it was funny because I was telling my husband, we were talking to somebody in our church, and I forget what the context was, but anyway, I said, honey, it's just good for business. Just saying.
Yeah.
Well, and it's great for the marriage too, because statistics show, where are the statistics of people that pray together?
Oh, praying together. Only about 8% of Christian couples pray daily together.
Yeah. I was referring to the business of intimacy, but yes, also the business. So, but yeah, no, and that's the sad thing is that so often, we are disconnected, and it's not meant that way. What's the saying, right? A family that prays together stays together. A couple
Yeah.
that prays together, stays together. And what is really at the essence of that? It is that emotional, spiritual, mental, that connection, the physical connection, but it's alignment. We're in alignment.
Yeah.
You mentioned maybe even it lasting a whole week when he prays for you. It's like, because you're aligned, you're grounded, and so that's so powerful. Tell us a little bit about your backstory, and kind of like, how did you come together? I know you have a business background, Kaylee, and Robert, you're in marketing. How did you gel that together? And just to kind of help our audience just get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I'm a PK actually at heart. Oh, not at heart. I was literally a PK, pastor's kid. And then Kaylee grew up in an entrepreneurial background. But when we met, I was in Fortune 500. I was working for a pharmaceutical company in marketing and sales. And she'd actually said, I can see you having a business.
And he thought I was completely crazy because I'm third generation entrepreneur family. And I just knew so many entrepreneurs. They were all around me. And so I just totally saw it in him. And he's like, oh my gosh, no way.
Yeah, because that's too risky. And I'm risk averse. And, my dad just said, go to school, stay out of debt, get a job. And so that's kind of what I did. And, it's nice to have the regular paycheck, and then you get the bonuses and the company car and all the benefits. So,
health insurance.
I was pretty comfortable. But as I got into my mid 40s, or, right on there, you start kind of questioning about long term, like, what do you really want to do and what are we supposed to do? And especially in our church, talking about the 7 Mountain Mandate and, how we're supposed to make an impact and doing our part to help transform society for the kingdom. I started really asking, what's my role? Am I supposed to stay in the corporate, just climb the corporate ladder, or is it supposed to be something different? And that's when I started entertaining, having a business, but I didn't know what kind of business it would be. So I remember just printing out all the different industries, the chart of all the industries, and I just checked off all these industries one by one. Nope, don't want to do that. Definitely don't want to do a restaurant. Just like nope. So I was left with nothing. And so I said, well, maybe, my background's in marketing and sales. Maybe I'll just do some consulting work with some businesses, like different types. And maybe I'll find something that I really want to start or do. And so what happened, I just started really enjoying the consulting process. Like seeing the results, on the business is one thing, but it was really the relationships I was having with the business owners and seeing how much of an impact the results were having on their life. And then, of course, you get to know the employees. I mean, when you're dealing with small business versus a multinational company, there's a different level of intimacy, right?
Yeah.
With the leaders and the stakeholders. And so having that relationship was awesome. And then as you get to know them, they started sharing about their personal life and how their marriage was struggling in different areas. And what else I made the connection was, you're working, number one, you don't really have much of a marketing issue as you have an efficiency and productivity issues and a margin issue. And I noticed that you're working way too hard than you need to for the results you're getting. And therefore, it's also keeping you away from being at home when you want to be at home, right? You start this business to have more freedom, but then next thing you know, you're more enslaved than I was at a W-2 position, right?
Yeah.
And so something's not connecting here. So really started noticing the trend of all these married entrepreneurs really struggling with work-life balance. And how do we do business well, but still prioritize marriage and family? And so that's when I kind of tapped Kaylee, we kind of compared notes about, me growing up in a pastor's home versus her growing up in an entrepreneur home. And we felt the same lack of balance in our life, how our dads were so focused on growing their organizations that the family was basically taking the back seat.
Yeah, in my childhood, the business became the mistress, and it was really challenging on the family, really taxing. My dad worked 6 days a week. To this day, I don't think he made it to my high school graduation, and that's tough. And, Robert had the marketing corporate experience where a lot of the entrepreneurs were wearing 100 different hats, and our go-to is just put more time in. But we're not like measuring things and keeping track of the performance, seeing what's working.
Yeah.
We usually don't have time or money to hire someone, or if we hire someone, we don't want to train them. We just want them to be, come already trained. So
yeah. Well, and you mentioned something that was really interesting when you talk about the time and the money margin, and I think that there's a lot of there's like you mentioned even in your book, there's business consultants and then there's marriage counselors, but there's not usually this like the same consultant working on both of those things, and recognizing the how one is affecting the other so significantly. It's like, well, you're having marriage problems because you're not communicating, and it's like, well, you're not communicating because you're stressed out. Why are you stressed out? And when I love in the book where you talk about time margin, because if we think about it, we think about it in terms of money margin, profit margins, but not time margin. So talk a little bit about that and the importance of scaling in terms of, so like you want to grow a better marriage. It's not about just making more money. It's about actually having more time leverage, right? Having money and time that helps to build that better marriage.
Yeah. We treat time as like a throwaway, like Kleenex.
Yeah.
We don't really value it like the asset that it really is, and it's not renewable, right? Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
And so we just put more and more time into trying to fix and grow the business, without really evaluating what kind of return am I getting for the time I'm putting in, right? Instead of so just give you a sales example. To get more sales, we're going to put more time, try to get more leads or whatever. And my question is always, what if we just increase the close rate?
Right.
You're already getting leads. What if we just increase the close rate? Unless you're at 100% close rate, right? We got room to grow.
Yes.
And so let's start there. So that's a prime example of increasing your money margins, basically getting more results with the time you're putting in, not just putting more time in. And really to protect the time, because we end up, even as maybe a solopreneur, if you're working by yourself, you have to wear a lot of hats, right? Obviously. But even in the midst of that, the question is, are you spending your time in the most productive way?
Yeah.
Or are you just spinning your wheels doing everything and not getting anything done?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where you really have to assess where you're spending your time and evaluate what's the best use of your time. Because most business owners, you heard the term on the business versus in the business. When you're working in the business, you're just in a daily grind. Working on the business is focusing on the most productive activities, like, getting new contracts, getting new leads, doing some research and development, testing menus for a restaurant, right? All those big things that don't provide immediate returns, but provide long-term benefit. And those are the type of things that we start to kick the can down the road, because we want to deal with the immediate issues.
Yeah.
And so we have to really evaluate that. Was like, okay, how do we address this, and really ask the question and get more critical about how we're using our time, so that you can be more productive with the time you have.
Because a lot of the general stuff, you can hire somebody to do that. But when you're in your zone of genius, usually only the owner can do that. And that's what's moving the business forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't spend as much time there, or any time there sometimes. What is it? The 80-20 rule, right? Dan Sullivan talks about most entrepreneurs, from Strategic Coach, most entrepreneurs are spending 80% of their time doing things that they're not actually good at, maybe 20% of the time doing the thing that's in your unique ability, and we need to flip that around. Right. And I hear that in what you're saying too. It's right. Like flipping that around. So we're doing the thing that we're in their zone of genius, and we're hiring out. But that takes a mindset shift, right? It's like when you're in it and, you're surviving, which a lot of entrepreneurs are in that survival mode. Right. You're like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to work on this. I don't have time to work on my business. I don't have time. And how you do anything is how you do everything. I don't have time to work on my marriage. I'm too much in it. So how do you get them out of that mindset where it's like, to just stop? Like if they're in it, right? And it's not like they can just take a month off and take time to, or whatever, or even a week off, right? To get in. Where do you start with them? You go into a business and they're just drowning in busy, day-to-day operations. How do you start carving back that time and determining what to carve back, where to carve it back? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So answer the first big question, the mindset issue, right? That's the most challenging piece. Because all the changes that need to happen and to do are actually very simple. It's actually very easy physically. Yeah. It's just mentally and emotionally.
Business is simple. It's just
it's just the mental and emotional block, right? Hiring a virtual assistant to take 10 hours of work off your plate is very simple, but emotionally and mentally, it's very hard to let go of control of those things, especially when you started the business by yourself or maybe with a small team and you're wearing multiple hats. You get so used to just doing everything, even though you're complaining about it, but you're comfortable in your own misery. Yeah. And so, just kind of, we just have to start by asking the question, how long do you want to continue down this road? Yeah. Right? Because it's not going to change. It doesn't even matter how much more money you make. We've had some of our clients, financially, they're already doing well. It's just the mental and emotional, get out of your own way and get out of the business's way. Yeah. Was the key. And so you have to start with asking the question, how long do you want to keep going? Because clearly the money is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. And one of our clients really struggles with that. He had great employees that he just loved and bragged about them all the time. And then his health started deteriorating. And then it got to the point he just couldn't keep up like he was. And so he was kind of forced to let it go, the micromanaging, because we all say, business owners, I don't micromanage. And when he did let it go, the employees were so happy. And he said, oh my gosh, I got so much more done when I wasn't involved in all this. Yeah. And then he was able to go do the things that he loved to do.
So the quote I use from him all the time is, more things get done when I'm out of the way.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much more gets done when I'm not working, when I'm doing it. So, so it's really, addressing the mindset is the first key. And, short of referring them to a counselor or something like that to really work in the mindset, it's like you said earlier, we're in survival mode. That's where we spend most of our time. And it's like, okay, how do we get you into executive mode?
Yes.
Right. Making big long-term decisions, moving the vision forward. And your way is not working. So we got to make a change. And that change is going to hurt a little bit because it's like, a new muscle that you got to work out. It's going to hurt a little bit, but let's trust the process. And that's kind of where the accountability piece holds. And then, we're usually working with husband and wife. So we already got a built-in accountability partner and helping them develop tools of how to communicate well without triggering each other. That's one of the first pieces of our work with them, because, you all know, you can look at your spouse and see what the challenges are and the gaps are. But when you say, hey, you should be doing this, or maybe you should scale back a little bit, there's going to be a conflict, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're speaking total truth.
We don't want to hear it.
we got to empower the accountability partners, built-in accountability partners, to know how to communicate in a way that doesn't trigger the other person to have some kind of negative reaction.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because conflict obviously is a really, important issue, is most people don't know how to deal with that. And so they just avoid. And, again, mindset, right? Being open to that. Before we do that, I do want to say, when you said about executive, to understand, take the executive role, what I heard in that too is that we need to understand our role in the business. Because I think a lot of times, to reference Michael Gerber, and he talked about the technician, the visionary, or the entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager. A lot of times they're working for someone else. They're doing, a really great job, and they're saying, I could do this for myself. They start their own business, and what they end up with is their own job. And they're just, still taking that same mindset, the employee mindset, if you will, versus the business owner mindset. And so that shift in understanding what my role is in this business, that's sometimes it's scary, because we don't want to let go of it, because it's like, it's our baby, right? I can't let go of my baby, right. Like I've had clients, they're empty nesters, and they're just like, no, I don't. But it's like with business, right? It's like, just to be able to let it shine and let it flourish on its own. We don't want to. We don't want to do that. Exactly. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's I think really important. Just knowing what that shift can be like. It changes everything in the way that we look at our business.
Well, and if you don't shift to the executive mode, then your business isn't going to go past you.
No,
there's no way. You're going to be the blockage of it.
Yeah, and you're always going to have a job. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let's talk about conflict. How do we resolve conflict? Because specifically when we're talking about married entrepreneurs, and you mentioned solo entrepreneur, and I know in your book you also talk about solo entrepreneur versus couple entrepreneur. So explain that, or couple preneur, however you say that, the difference. And then, yeah, how do you deal with that conflict?
This is your baby, honey. You love this stuff.
The conflict. Well, it stems from childhood. In my upbringing, we didn't do conflict well. We would just walk out the door on each other, slam the door, hang up on you, get in the car, and storm out the driveway. So as soon as conflict was to arise with us, it was pretty tricky and it was hard. And we did premarital counseling, which is a whole nother story in itself. It's in the book. and that we came up with rules of engagements, and it's what we take our clients through. So since my family would walk out the door, Robert and I would get into a conflict, and I would think to myself, oh my gosh, is he going to leave me? Like, is he going to walk out and never come back? I don't know. So that created a lot of anxiety and fear in me. And so for each couple, it's different what our triggers are and rules of engagement is. So we came up with a plan so that if we are in a heated discussion, if somebody needs a break, they'll say like, hey, you know what? I love you. I need to take a break, go on a walk or whatever. I'll be back in such and such time. And then we'll resume this conversation. So then if that, if he's mad and he walks out or needs a timeout, I know I can kind of calm down, being all right that he's going to come back, not wondering, oh my gosh, is he coming back or not?
Yeah. So the keys to resolving conflict or dealing with conflict or preventing disagreements to become like a big issue is stay off of those landmines, those things that trigger emotional triggers. And she just talked about one is walking out, right? That's not going to help anything. Right? It's just going to piss her off or get her more worried if I'm coming back. And like for me, one trigger I need to stay away from is being sarcastic, making a sarcastic comment, right? So we know that 80% of how we interpret information is based on how it was said and not what was said. So it's that nonverbal. And so with those nonverbal cues, and if it's a negative trigger, next thing you know, a conflict is really about the emotional issue. It's not even about the topic anymore. Right. We're just really, we're really upset at how you make you feel.
Yes. And
so if you stay away from the emotional triggers, and that's why we call it in the rules of engagement out of bounds, I think we all know how we trigger our spouse.
We know each other's buttons.
So we make that goes in the list, right? Out of bounds. And then in bounds are those things that how do we provide a healthy conversation to create a safe space to be able to talk, right? A lot of times you talk about avoidance, and Kaylee and I both grew up as conflict avoidant because we're afraid of what the conflict might result in our relationship, right? And so we need a safe space. So we have to talk about that. What creates a safe space? And so, like, for example, like Kaylee will come up to me, she's going to present an issue to me that she kind of has suspicion that it might trigger me, that she'll say, honey, I need to say something, but guard your heart. And so when she says that, it means this could be a touchy subject, but don't react or try not to react.
And how do you not react to that? You're like, what?
Well, I don't want to catch him off guard. If I catch him off guard, totally like not expecting it, then he's reacting.
It's better to have a shot over the bow and be prepared than for her to just lean in on it, right?
And you've made those agreements up front that you know what that means. Yeah. And then so it's being said in love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I literally have to go, I got to prepare myself, think, don't react. And I just have to prepare myself. And I said, okay, go ahead. And then you just got to put yourself in that situation. So what that does, it creates a safe space for her, right? She's already warned me, and I'm already kind of in that mode of, okay, don't overreact. Let's just listen and let's just talk. And then that's a safe space. So that's kind of a, inbounds. It's like, okay, warn me if you can. Sometimes we don't remember, but asking clarifying questions as opposed to just jumping to conclusions. Ask a couple of clarifying questions first, because a lot of times we react too quick and we make assumptions and then we're off to the races. right?
Yeah.
And we're going round and round.
And a little thing turns into a big thing. And all it was a miscommunication a lot of the time, or maybe I just didn't hear him correctly.
Yeah. Well, and this is relevant for couples in general. And then you add on the fact that you're actually operating a business, and now your business partners in that case, sometimes it's one's an entrepreneur and the other one's working at a job. And so there's that dynamic. But even like in the business, right? You're both business partners.
Mhm.
And now you've got the pressure of, maybe some deadlines and things happening, and this needs to be done, and you just want to get it done, and you fire a shot out over the bow to your spouse. And so how do you deal with that? And even like from that accountability standpoint of getting things done, differentiating, right, between we're spouses, we love each other, we're married, and we're business partners, and knowing how, do you delineate between that, and if you do or don't, how do you navigate that, right, where you're not, one area is not spilling over into the other area.
Well, how you just prevent like one area like business spilling over into personal is really about not taking things personal. It doesn't matter whether it's a business decision or if it's a home decision. When you start making things personal, that's when emotions flare up and then nothing gets done.
Right.
And so whether it's at home or in business, like, because since you brought up business, you talk about deadlines. First thing is, let's be more proactive about this. I don't wait to the nth hour to say, hey, Kaylee, have you done this yet? That kind of stuff. So what we do is, one, we just understand, and every couple should do this anyway, regardless if you work together or not, but understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses. Like, we use a DISC profile, and Kaylee needs a little bit more time to stew on certain things than I do based on certain situations, right? And so one thing we do is, whatever the issue is, or whatever deadline we have, obviously we say, okay, here's what needs to get done, and here's a deadline. But we also kind of just keep checking in. And part of that check-in is we have a weekly meeting on Mondays at 3:30, just to go over both personal and business issues. What's going on? What's coming down the pipe? And how are we doing? How are we progressing on this? Do you need more help or what? Right? And just those regular check-ins also helps prevent those coming up to the nth hour and things aren't getting done. Also, you got to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses when it comes to the task at hand. Is this something that Kaylee should be doing or I should be doing? Since you read the book, you'll know that I put Kaylee in charge of QuickBooks. Things
I'm
were getting
the
done.
creative type. I like color, and numbers you can't really aren't that colorful. So I
want to highlight.
I didn't want to tell him no. I thought, oh, I could do it. He really needs me. But it turned into yes, because he would be, honey, did you get the QuickBooks done? And I'd be like, no, because I'd put it off because it's something I don't like to do. And so then he's like, did you get it done? No. So then eventually I'd go do it. And then he'd come back to me and say, honey, this is all wrong. It's got to be perfect. There's no wiggle room. And then it triggers me because I feel like, oh my gosh, I put all this time and I really tried and you don't appreciate me. And then he gets triggered because it does need to be perfect, but
So in business and
it's
life
this
too,
vicious cycle.
Yes.
So it kind of starts with making sure you're in the right role.
Yeah.
And when you look at my DISC profile and all that, I'm the analytical one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one that deals with the numbers. I just didn't want to do QuickBooks because I thought it was a pain in the rear end. So hence, how we addressed this was, don't be cheap, hire a bookkeeper.
Yeah.
Right? Simple solution. But again, sometimes in business, especially when you're a small business starting out, you kind of, just to save a buck, you have your spouse do it or something else. You just try to piecemeal stuff. And it might not be QuickBooks, it might be something else, but you try to save a buck, and it ends up turning into a worse thing than if you just spent the money and kept the peace. And you also have somebody that's good at what they're doing to get it done faster than you. So we're actually, paying somebody to do something is really investment in our time and our money to free up in areas so that we can work more in our zone of genius so we can get our business moving forward. So roles, understanding roles and responsibilities are also a good way to start to prevent those conflict issues.
Well, and I want to say too, if there's something like time sensitive we need to talk about, or I feel like it's important, and we've already had our meeting for the week, making sure you catch him at the right time. Because sometimes I could just barrel into his office, oh, honey, I need da 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 da. And what do you think? And he's in the middle of writing this content. You know what I mean? It's totally wrong time. So then,
like yesterday.
Yeah. So he gets triggered, and then I'm like, I'm trying to make a decision, you're not helping me. And then I get triggered, and then it's like, as opposed to, is now a good time? If not, when would be a good time to talk to you about this?
Yeah. So mind you, like all these are tools that you you have to use probably for your lifetime. It's not like what we're saying is everything we do is perfect. Like we always carve out the right time. Like she said, sometimes she'll interrupt me. Like yesterday, I was writing content.
Oh, were you?
For e-blast, and she was yelling from the other room, like, "Hey, what's this?" She was asking questions. She was asking questions from the other room, and so one question was fine, but then it was two, and then it was three. Then it became a pattern, and I'm like, "Honey, can we do this later?" I'm in the middle of something, right?
Yeah.
Before me just blowing up, it's like, stop. Just like, okay, honey, can we just do this later? So just being, mindful of those kind of things is helpful.
Well, I'm married to an engineer, and so we had this conversation just recently because I was asking his opinion on something, and and I said, "Hey, can you just?" And he's like, "I'm watching something." He was studying some course or doing something. I was like, "Well, you can stop and just help me."
There's a pause button.
There's a pause button. He's like, "But I'm in thought," It's like,
you're on that thought train, man.
So it's like, never mind. But understanding, so I grew up in an entrepreneurial household, and my parents owned a business. My dad owned the business. My mom worked in the business essentially as the bookkeeper. And then as they started a home-based business as well, I got involved in the business. And my brother helped in my dad's garage business, and I helped in the home-based business. And so we were kind of like knee deep in this. And I just laughing as you were talking about the different personalities, right? There's this saying, right? Opposites attract and then they attack. So after they get married, right? Because like, why aren't you more like me? So my dad is like, we would never want him to do anything with the bookkeeping at all. Even like before computers, it was like, just don't even touch it. Just stay away, right? He's the talker. He can do all, it's amazing, what he does, present the opportunity, sell, do all the things, but not the paperwork. And so, just knowing the roles, like you talk about, knowing those roles was really important. And then I had the interesting dynamic of being in the midst of that, even as a kid, always being the referee in our household. So we didn't avoid conflict. I had D's in my household. So I do use the disc and strengths finder as well. So they're all D's, right? My dad's a DI,
Oh, wow.
My mother's a DC, my brother's a DI, and I'm the youngest. And I'm also a D, but there was no room for that in the household, right? So I remember saying, when do I get to be right? When do I get to be, my brother's like, you don't. It's like, well, I'm glad we're clear on that, And so it was like, everybody had a point. I remember dating a guy who came in, he was an S personality, and he came in SC personality, and he's like, you all just want to make a point. Like, everybody's got to be right. And we're looking at him and going, and what is your point?
Who invited you?
Who invited you to this conversation? What's wrong with this? But so it was an interesting dynamic. And then as an adult, be partners with them, with my parents in the business, and the three of us. And when they would fight, I'd be like the referee in the middle. I'm like, okay, you go to your court, you go to your corner, and time out, And so it was interesting dynamics in that, and learning how to deal with that conflict, learning how to, you said something so valuable in there, is not taking it personally. I think that's so important. We take things personally, or it's like my dad in the garage business, he might be yelling over, a bunch of cars and whatever, and going, hey, do such and such. And it's like, who do you think you're talking to? That doesn't work, because then you end up, right? It's just understanding the situation and not taking it personally, I think is so important. A good lesson, I think, a reminder for all of us. So yeah, it's good. How do you deal with, speaking of conflict, you included in your book, you included it in some of the material, and I thought it would be great to touch on this, because I can almost hear Some people saying, okay, but what do you do with the person who's the provoker? How do you deal with the passive aggressive person? How do you deal with some of these personalities who maybe, and it's not really personality, but the way that they're showing up, that they're not playing by the rules of engagement. You know what I mean? Like they got their own rules of engagement. And maybe there's multiple family members in that business. How do you do that? Right? Maybe somebody who's sabotaging, somebody who likes to stir. My dad was the provoker, likes to stir things up. My mother's the peacemaker, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, how do you deal with that?
Well, first, I mean, start with husband and wife.
Yes.
We create those rules of engagement, and we've agreed to it. You sign your name if you need to sign your name. Some couples have gone as far as notarizing it, right? And so we make an agreement, and I would think as husband and wife, your word is your bond, and especially when it's written. And if you want me to live by this, then you need to. And so there's that sense of accountability. And in the beginning, it's a little rough, right? I mean, it's, again, you're learning a new skill of how to communicate. And so literally we just advocate towards, you really got to create a routine on how you have these discussions. Sometimes it's being in a certain place in the house or not the house, or it's outside or outside the business, right? Or in a specific room. But you got to create some kind of routine or habit to start getting into a sense of being able to stick to rules of engagement. And then later on, you can do it on the fly, right? But you gotta train yourself a little bit. Yeah, you got to train yourself and hold each other accountable. But when you hold each other accountable, it's not by shaming them and say, it's just start, because it's probably a trigger that's probably in the rules of engagement. So that's why having it out and printed is helpful, because then the spouse goes, hey, you're just triggering me. You're going against, you're trying to hold me accountable, but you're doing, so it's like, hey, let's time out here and let's stay away from these triggers. And so let's start over. Yeah. But also, a lot of times when we're in this like cycle of insanity, we're in conflict, and regardless of the personality type, I think one of the things you can do, even like Kaylee shared earlier about prefacing the conversation ahead of time so that I know what's needed. But sometimes in the midst of an argument, maybe she didn't preface it ahead of time, but in the midst of an argument, I'll stop or she'll stop and I'll say, what do you need from me? Do you need me to hear, listen, and empathize, or do you need a solution? Because as men, we just go in solution mode right away, right? Come the 80-20 rule. A lot of times with women, 80% of the time it's listen and empathize, and 80-20 for men are let's solve this problem.
And then it frustrates me, and then I'm like, you're not listening to me. And then he comes up with another idea, and I get more frustrated. And I know one time he asked me, what do you need? And I totally caught him off guard, you guys. And I said, a hug. And he's like, what? I'm like, a hug. So he gave me a hug. I was on my merry way. I think he was all upset.
He was shocked. He's like, that was easy.
No, he wanted
to. It was too easy.
Yeah, you had like 100 solutions.
I was a little skeptical. I'm like, what is she doing? Is she setting me up for something?
You're like, wait, come back. I have all these solutions. And so I went on my merry way, and he's like, well, what just happened? I don't know about this.
Yeah, so start with the rules of engagement. If you need a third party to witness it and all that, I mean, it can sound very like business-like, but it's needed. Yeah. I mean, we got to create a safe space for people to talk. And so the passive-aggressive person just doesn't feel safe to raise up an issue, right? Because I can be passive-aggressive because I feel like she's not going to like me if what I say upsets her.
Right.
So we go the avoidant, this base is an avoidant route. The passive aggressiveness is an avoidant route, right? And because we don't feel safe. So creating that safe space, and then of course, then rules of engagement, and have a witness if you need to. And then always just ask, hey, what do you need from me? Because if you feel the passive aggressive person go into their shell, right? How Kaylee brings me out is like, what do you need?
Well, and I think we all need to be adults. I mean, it's easy for me to want to go back into my childhood when I was 5 years old. I just want my way, and I want you to listen to me, and I just want to win at all costs. You know what I mean? But that's not good for either one of us to get my mind and dig my heels in that position, because like I said, it could have just been a miscommunication, and then I'm all upset about this little thing that didn't happen, you know what I mean, that I thought in my mind that it did. So
yeah, and she kind of alluded to something, and you didn't ask this question, but I want to bring it up anyway. There's this word called compromise, that they talk about, marriage is about compromise. We say, no, it's not about compromise, because compromise by definition is tearing the good pieces of both parts and then making it something acceptable. It's basically accepting what's less than great. And so what we look at is, how do we make a good decision? And then sometimes it's going to be going her idea or my idea, or sometimes it's pieces of both, or sometimes just through the conversation, we come up with a solution that's different from either one of ours. And has nothing to, and it may have bits and pieces of it, but really we're trying to create the best solution. So instead of thinking about compromise and a disagreement, so that what's the best decision we can make for us?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that was something that stood out in the book, because you talk about the resentment that develops out of that. If I sacrifice something or give up something, and and the other person is as well, let's say my husband, then it's like we're both feeling like we're missing something that's might be important to us. And recently we were talking to somebody, and he said, oh, I'm just going to do what she wants me to do, kind of thing. And it's like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. It may work for the moment, but it's not going to work long term, and you're going to get resentful. And then it's actually creating a bigger rift than talking it out, and, like you said, coming up with a good decision, and coming back to that whole idea of not taking it personally. When we take it personally, we go into that childhood mode, of the trigger, and I just want my way, and it's just being able to look at it objectively and saying, hey, what's actually going, it's like, I think I look at the observer, right? Like stepping out and going, what's actually happening here? Even for myself, it's like, of course I'm a coach, right? But it's like, still, anybody, just look at it and saying, what's actually going on right now? And get curious about that.
I know a leader just right now, they're splitting. I was having lunch with him, and he was basically alluding to the fact that, he's kind of given, had her way, let her have her way all these years. She's controlling, I let her have her way. And now it's that all those years of resentment that have just piled up, and now we're irreconcilable differences, and we need to split. And I'm like, because you're not happy? I'm like, well, it's because we really haven't addressed the issue. It's like, this is a fixable issue, but now we've just got this big pile of stuff that we've let go on without really addressing it, because we've let them have their way. Right. And that's not healthy for anybody.
That's so good. So what have we not talked about today that we need to talk about in this topic of how do you build a successful business and a successful marriage as a married entrepreneur?
Well, one thing, for the sake of time, on the business side, it's, you built this business to have more freedom, and yet you're tied down to it. And we talked about the control issue, those kind of things. In kind of the grand scheme of things, in order for your business to be able to scale and grow beyond your own capacity, you have to set the foundation for it to do that, right? Again, if you're in control of everything, that means the capacity of growth falls on you. So which means we got to just get rid of as much stuff as possible off our plate, so we can focus on what we're good at and have a team or whatever to do that. So it's hiring the right people, the right position to fit, systems and processes, and then making sure on the money side, you're working with good margin. So real quick, the typical average business is running off about a 7.7% net profit margin, which is okay, but it's not great. So 15 to 20% for our clients is where we want them. And that means we have adequate bottom line to be able to continue to invest back into the business, to grow, take care of unexpected issues, to be reinvest into the business, to hire more people, hire more help. And when we get to that point, now when we get to a healthy margin, then you're going to be able to build a business that's scalable. So that's usually the first place to start. And that's actually very fixable pretty quick, because it's just adjusting margin. We're not adjusting sales. We're not trying to get more sales. We're just addressing margin. So it's increase in price, looking for ways to be more efficient and productive. So you basically lower your cost per, and then, or a combination of two. And when we get to that, then we'll have the adequate margin to be able to hire that first virtual assistant or that salesperson or whatever that you need, that first piece to start getting your business more into growth phase and taking a lot more pressure off of the business owner. So look at your time, look at your money, and then measure performance are the three things that will help you position your business to be able to scale, so that you'll have, be able to have the freedom that you wanted.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Free gifts. You've got a link that we're going to include in the show notes where you've got some gifts for the listeners. Kaylee, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's marriedentrepreneur.co, leaders of transformation.
/ leaders of transformation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot the slash.
It's okay.
The details.
Yes.
This is why you guys make a great team.
I'm the C, right? Yeah. So there's a free download for work-life balance. And then there's also our access to our book, Tandem, The Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Work-Life Balance. And if you want to talk to us live and pick our brain, there's actually a link for that too, right on that landing page. So yeah, awesome. marriedentrepreneur.co / leaders of transformation. So hopefully they remember that because it's the name of your podcast,
right? Yeah, awesome. Well, and you also, your podcast, because you also have a podcast called Thriving in Tandem. Yes. And so we'll make sure I know it's also on that page, and it'll also be in our show notes separately so people can check out your podcast and just continue to learn from you and what you're doing. So yeah, this has been great. It's like reliving my childhood. No,
it's mine too.
Hope you can sleep well tonight.
Oh yeah. I've had a lot of therapy. No. So yes. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here, both of you. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to getting a chance to meet you in person because you're not that far away, and I'm sure we'll do some fun things together. So yeah, it'll be good. And I always say leaders of transformation take action. So for our audience out there, if you're listening, if you're watching, take action on something that you learned today. Sometimes taking action is making time to stop and look at where you're at. So it's not necessarily doing more. Maybe it's just stepping out and saying, let's just actually take a moment together to, maybe it's eye contact. When's the last time? So this is for somebody I know because I just thought of this. When's the last time you actually looked into your spouse's eyes and it wasn't about like telling them what they need to do or passing, ships passing in the night, but literally spending 5 minutes and having eye contact, quality eye contact and connection with your spouse. If you haven't done that, it's your first action. I highly recommend it. It's really important. Start there. And then you can look at what are the next steps from there. How do we have that conversation? How do we, rediscover our values, rediscover those rules of engagement, what we may have agreed to at some point, but kind of went away from it, or maybe you've never created those rules of engagement and it's now time that you need to do that and sit and do that. I encourage you also to, of course, go back to the marriedentrepreneur.co / leaders of transformation. Go book a time. If you're having challenges in your business, if you're having challenges in your marriage as a married entrepreneur and you need some support, get the support that you need. Robert and Kaylee are here. They've been through it. They go through it on a day-to-day basis. They have the tools. Invest in yourself and at least do the discovery call and learn more about what they can do to help you and your spouse along the way. Get a copy of their book, Tandem. It is excellent, very relevant, very practical. You'll relate. Their stories are in there. There's so much value in this. And so I just encourage you to take action because you know what? You can listen to podcasts all day and it's wonderful on your drive back and forth, but it's when you actually apply what you learn that transformation happens. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, reach out to us there. And of course, find us on social as well. And I hope you enjoyed it. And next week, we're going to have another episode, another amazing guest. Join us next week. We look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day.